It is good seeing you guys. It's good seeing you. Those of you joining us online, I'd like to welcome you as well. We are in this series we've been covering the last several weeks called My Big Fat Mouth. Been having a little bit of fun with this over the last couple weeks. We've talked about grumbling, right? So some of you may remember when we talked about grumbling in the first week, Moses said when we grumble, we're not grumbling against other people, we are grumbling against who? We're grumbling against God. Right? Because this is when we grumble, we come to this place where we don't trust God, that He's big enough, that He's good enough, that He can provide, He can protect. And we watch the Israelites, they grumbled and grumbled and grumbled, and it's so easy to do. Then we talked about criticizing the second week, how it's just so easy to shred each other and shred the people that we're closest to, we love the most. And then last week we talked about lying, right? And how many times, there's times when we lie that we can actually be lying to God. So we're going to kind of dive into a little different thing today. And so I'm just curious, just starting off, how many of you guys love M&Ms? Yeah. All right. Now, just curious to see a poll here. Are your favorites just the plain M&Ms? How many plain M&Ms are your favorite? How many prefer the peanut M&Ms? I know we probably got some food allergies here, so I'm not going to be passing these out. These are mine.
What about peanut butter M&Ms?
All right, these are mine, all right, because I'm up here, right? So this is the Christian version of M&Ms. It's kind of an illustration we're going to kind of be going with today, because these are the healthier version of M&Ms. All right, these are called Unreal. How many ever bought Unreal products? Right, because there's no food coloring dyes. It's all naturally colored from vegetables the way they used to do things a long time ago. So you're not going to get all these crazy things inside your body and have all these reactions. And it's actually got organic stuff in it. And the thing that I really like about this is that, one, I have them up here, but that, you can just reach in here and, it's like when you open up a thing of like M&Ms or the Christian version of M&Ms, just going to go with that analogy, all right? Because the reason why I'm calling it the Christian version of M&Ms is because we always try to Christianize some things, right? To justify some things that we do, as we've kind of talked about in this series. And so, when you open up a bag like this, I'm just curious, how many have a specific color that you like of M&Ms? Now, I'm just want to see who are the weird people. Now, how many of you actually set out that color and eat those? See, I know I've seen people through the years. It's really weird, right? And the thing is about these things is we get to choose which color we get to eat, which ones we get to eat. And what's so unique about these things is that it's just this tiny little ball of sweetness. Right? It's this choice morsel. And the hard thing is that when you open up a bag like this, you just can't eat one. Right? How many of you ever just eaten one and walked away? Let's pray for we're going to pray for this person right now. I mean, it's hard to walk away from. And then whenever you open up a bag and there's other people around you, then they want some of those choice morsels as well, right? Then but I'm not going to share. They're mine. All right, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about choice morsels, right, that are so tasty to take in, and sometimes they're just so fun to share. And so the topic we're talking about today when it comes to our big fat mouth is gossip. Oh, that's a good one, right? Gossip, right? And I think if we're all honest when it comes to gossip, that it's one of those things that we all struggle with from time to time, right? Because we all at times have a big fat mouth. So I want to start off with a passage in the book of Proverbs. We've covered a lot of Proverbs in this series. Proverbs chapter 18, verses 7 and 8. And we'll start with verse 7. It kind of sets it up. It says, "The mouths of fools are their undoing." Now, that's a great verse, isn't it? The mouths of fools. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. I have made a fool of myself many times through the years, right? And our mouths, when our big fat mouths open up, especially if you like to talk, they can be your undoing many times throughout the journey. So there's a lot of wisdom in Proverbs. The mouths of fools are their undoing, and their lips are a snare to their very lives. They can trap us. They can ensnare us. They can really get us into just a deep mess really quickly. And as we've talked about through the series, it's hard to undo that. So this is setting it up, goes to the next verse, why we're going with this title today. Verse 8 says, the words of a gossip are like what? They're like choice morsels. And they are so good, right? And sometimes they taste so good. It says they go down to the inmost part. Now, I'm sure when we think of choice morsels, we all kind of have our thing. Am I done? Let's go home.
Timer's off.
I love technology, right? I mean, Jesus didn't have to compete with any of this. It was either a donkey or something. Well, somebody get their donkey out of here, right? Now it's... Right. But it says... you know how many people I'm going to tell today? Let's just post about that right now. Just kidding. So the words, the scripture says, is this gossip can be, it's like choice morsels. We get to choose, right? What we're going to say. We get to choose what we take in. So that's kind of where we're going today, right? And sometimes it can be really tasty. But we got to be on guard, what Scripture says. So we get to the New Testament. Jesus kind of takes this thought and says it in a different way. The religious leaders were getting hung up over all of these hand-washing traditions, thinking that how they washed their hands and what they did was, that was the meticulous thing to do. And Jesus was like, you're always missing the most important things, focusing on your traditions and your rituals. And so Jesus says it this way in Matthew 15, verse 11. He says, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them. All right? Now, he's not talking about our just, healthy eating. He's talking about our words, right? What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, right? That is what defiles them. It's the words that we say and how we use those words. And over again in Proverbs, it talks about our words, our mouth, our lips, and how they can get us into trouble, and we can open our big fat mouth, and it doesn't take long, and we are making a fool of ourselves. We're getting ourselves in trouble, and gossip is like a choice morsel. And sometimes it's hard to just settle for one. We just want more. Right? And it's just easy just to keep taking them in and just keep saying things and doing things. Now, I'm just going to give you a working definition for gossip. It won't be up here on the screens. But gossip is this. Gossip is idle talk or rumor. All right? Especially about the personal or private affairs of another person. It's basically when we're saying things about someone else without their permission. And it's not good things, it's bad things. Juicy, choice morsels that we just got to share with the world, right? And let other people know what's going on in someone's life. Now, I'm curious, how many of you know somebody that's a gossip? Don't raise your hand. Don't be elbowing people. Come on now. Don't be elbowing back there, right? How many of you know somebody? I mean, there's probably somebody that comes to mind immediately when you think of that person's a gossip, right? How many of you, now you can raise your hand on this one, how many of you ever have listened to gossip? It's probably every one of us, right? We've all listened to gossip, right? You may be here today, and you may be in a third category where you're the person that struggles gossiping, right? And we all probably do at some degree. It's so easy to open our big fat mouths. And I heard this saying, and I thought this was kind of clever, so I'm going to share it with you. A person said, today gossip can travel around the world and get back before the truth can get out of bed and put on its pants. And with this information age that we live in, it doesn't take long for word to travel. And I don't know why, but social media is so tempting to post so much information. And so easily, and I don't know why people do it, but I'm not saying it's to anybody here, but it's so easy to air dirty laundry out on social media. And from time to time, you'll see people do that. There's an offense that taking place. Somebody's upset with their boss. Tyler, did you take down that post? No. It's like somebody's upset with somebody they work with, somebody they live with, somebody in their neighborhood, whatever, and it doesn't take, just boom, and it's traveled around the world, right? I mean, it just doesn't take very long at all, and it's out there through a text, through an email, through whatever. It's so easy to do. I think as we've covered, all these different topics, that our culture today, it's kind of crept into the church. That's why I said that these choice morsels, we tend to want to Christianize them a little bit, right? And it's almost as if it's become acceptable because of social media and the ability to communicate even more. We don't have to open our big fat mouth. We just open our big fat thumbs. And away we go, right? And I think it's almost become acceptable to start things and to say things and to post things about other people without their permission, personal information, right? And then next thing you know, it travels around the world and back before the truth even gets a chance to get out of bed and put its pants on, right? And so gossip is something we got to be aware of. And where it usually starts is that one person gets told one thing, and then that person tells another thing, and someone else, and then that person tells someone else. And before you know it, by the time it gets back to you or another person, the story has gotten so fabricated that it's like the rumor weed just grew and grew and grew, and there's nothing of the sort, right? And we find out all this crazy stuff. It's kind of interesting. I was reading about some just things on gossip and rumors, and how many of you know that when Abraham Lincoln died, there was several factions of people that threatened to steal his body? You guys know that? So I was just reading this. This could be rumor. This could be gossip. I'm not really sure, but I'm just telling you, all right, if it was online, it's got to be true, right? So I was reading this. I was kind of looking up several different sources. Moody Bible Press, it was used as a sermon illustration once, that Abraham Lincoln, there was these people that were wanting to steal his body and hold it ransom to get money. So they had to take extra precautions to make sure when he was buried that everything was sealed and secure, right? But then there was some stories going around about the Lincoln family and other things. It was other people, to where then they were saying that Abraham Lincoln's body wasn't even in the casket. 36 years after his burial, there were so many threats and rumors going on about the potential. They had to redo his burial, and the family had this private session where they went in and pried open the casket to see if his body was still there. Because of all these rumors. He's still alive, guys. That's rumor, but it could be. His body was still in the casket, right? But they had to pry it open and look when they were rebuilding his memorial and his burial, because all these rumors that were circulating, because it didn't take long. Once one piece of information was out there, it just kept going around and going around and going around. Just this past week, a friend of mine, I was in a car with him, driving to a Reds game, and he started telling me about this. You're going to get a kick out of this one, Bryce. This giant snapping turtle. You guys, anybody heard this story? The giant snapping turtle that decapitated a guy in Lake Monroe? Right? And this Purdue professor did all the forensic study on it and found that this thing had to be 9 foot long and 300 pounds, and the whole thing was a fabricated story. There is no Professor Leatherfoot or some weird name. There was no real professor. There was no stabbing tool. But I'm telling you, we were cracking up. We were sitting there looking at it, because it's like it didn't take long, and it sounded so real. It sounded so true. And that's why you got to fact check everything today, right? Because there's so much information, it can get really confusing. But gossip is sharing it's idle talk, chatter about somebody's personal information that can be damaging to them. And it's so easy to do. Now, we can laugh about these choice morsels, but it's never funny when we're at the end of the gossip, right? And I'm sure somewhere along the way, if you've been alive for some time, especially as an adult, you've been stung by gossip. When it gets back to you that somebody has said something about you. So, since we're kind of Christianizing this a little bit, I want to talk about just how it is that we gossip. How do we gossip? We've been talking about different questions throughout this series. How do we gossip? How do we go about doing this thing called gossip? And I think one of the first ones I want to put up here is the Christian version of gossip. Oh, we got to pray for Brother John. You would not believe what I heard is going on. He got that new job. And there's this woman at that workplace. And doesn't get home till really late at night. So we got to pray for Brother John, because he's struggling in his marriage a little bit. So we got to make sure we keep him in prayer. We're not laughing very much, are we? It's so easy to do, right? And Christians, we kind of, the unreal version, right? It's the Christian version of gossip. We're going to share it as a prayer request that person didn't give us permission to, all right? Here's another one I've heard people say. It's already out in the open. So we might as well go on and share it, right? I mean, I've had to deal with this personally with some family matters. It's like, and I've seen other people deal with the same thing. Something happens in your family. Let's say there's a birth or somebody passes away, and there's just some of us. I'm not pointing any fingers. I'm not saying it's anybody even in our church, but there's just some people that love to be the communication directors of the world and tell the whole world information before the family even gets to share the information, right? And say, well, it's already out there. Could you just take down that post? Could you just not say, but it's already out there. Everybody already knows, right? And it's so easy to do. It's so easy just to want to be the communicator and let everybody else know and share personal information that somebody has not maybe given you permission. And so, which ties into the next one is we post it on social media, right? It's so easy to do. It's so tempting to do. Who needs the TV station anymore when we are the TV station? We are the radio station. We have control. We can tell the world before the world even knows, because gossip can travel all around the world and back before the truth even gets out of bed and puts his pants on, right? So it's so easy to do. We can post it on social media, share it as a prayer request. And then another one I've heard people say, well, it's true, so it's not gossip, right? And so it's so easy to, and I'm sharing this, I'm doing this topic because I know how hard it is to keep my big fat mouth shut. And it's just easy. And we live in an age where we got to be careful in what we say and how we say it. Pastor Craig Rochelle said this. I think we have it on the screens as a quote, maybe. He said, everything that is said should be true. Everything that comes out of our mouth, I would even say everything that we post, we should know that we know that we know that it's true. Yet, not everything true must be said. Right? But it's hard not to, because of social media, we feel empowered to communicate and to get things out and to let people know. And so there's a fine line of informing, and I'm talking about personal information about somebody that could be damaging to their character. And it's become acceptable in culture today. And so we've got to be wise in how we do things. Everything, I think what Craig said is great. Everything that is said should be true. We should know that it's true, but not everything that is true must be said. And sometimes if you like to talk like I do, it is hard to hold it back. I'm just busting at the seams to let somebody know. All right? So those are different ways that it's easy to gossip. The thing I really want us to get into is understanding who gossip hurts, who does gossip hurt? And that's where we're going to spend some of our time, and then we're going to look at how do we work through this whole thing of gossip. So we're going to look at just a couple things. Who does gossip hurt? The first thing and the most obvious thing is it's the person that's spoken about. All right, we know that. That's where gossip really does its damage. When somebody finds out, the person that's been talked about, that it gets back to them. This is what Proverbs 16:28 says about gossip. It says, a troublemaker plants seeds of strife. Right? We have a whole bag of choice morsels. We just got to share. Right? And they're so tasty. They're so good, right? That we plant seeds of strife. And it says a gossip, it separates the best of friends. Now, unfortunately, I've experienced the pain of this in my own life because of my big fat mouth. And it's easy at times to want to justify the reason you're sharing information. And even as a pastor, it's easy to think, well, this information might help this person because this is what this other person went through, right? But without having that person's permission to share that, and then it gets shared, and then that person who was a dear friend of mine finds out that that information got shared, it really did a number on our friendship. And it took a long time to rework and redo and regain that person's trust. And it's so easy to do. And it says gossip separates the best of friends. Verse 13, Proverbs 11:13 says this. It says, a gossip, the reason why it hurts so bad is a gossip betrays a confidence. It betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. And once that confidence is broken, that trust is broken, it is really hard to get it back. And it can separate even the best of friends. It can separate families, right? It can be so destructive when we open our mouth and it just goes on and on and on. And we're just passing out choice morsels everywhere. Now, I will say this. There's probably one exception to this rule. And that one exception will be if somebody shares personal information with you over self-harm or suicide, then you should encourage that person to tell somebody else. And if they don't, you need to go to an authority to help them, to save their life, to protect them. That's probably the only exception to that rule. But when somebody shares personal information, we need to not go around and share that with the rest of the world unless they give us permission to do that. All right? So gossip, it hurts the person that is talked about. And I think one of the reasons why it hurts is I kind of put this other thought in the midst of this one, is that when we gossip, what it does for us, it creates these gossip alliances that makes us feel significant. Right? If I talk about somebody else with somebody else, then it's like, you know what? This person over here, they kind of get under my skin a little bit, right? And so, but if I talk about them with somebody else, then I kind of create this alliance, and it makes me feel better because you agree with me, right? Right? You agree with me. This person's a knucklehead, right? Come here, Mike. I just need to, just kidding. Just you stay there. Right? I mean, it's so easy. It's just like to make an alliance about this somebody else, right? And so it makes us feel significant. And I think when we post it, it makes us feel empowered. And so there's this passage in Isaiah. Isaiah is just, speaking to God's people. He's speaking for God in Isaiah chapter 30. And this is what God speaks to his people. He says, what sorrow awaits my rebellious children, says the Lord. You make plans that are contrary to mine. You make alliances that are not directed by my Spirit. They're not the Spirit of God. They're not the Spirit of Christ. This is thus piling up your sins. Now, what's taking place in this context is we see it over and over again when you read through biblical history and God's people, is there's just times where it's like, some of the leaders, they're actually doing really well, and then they're getting a little prideful, and they're thinking, you know what? I'm going to make an alliance with this other king. Right. because that's going to make me feel even more powerful. So that nothing can come against me. Even though the Lord's protected us and He's given us all these victories, they would just out of just a moment of weakness make these alliances. Or because they're completely wicked, they still go out of the way and they'll try to make other alliances. And God says, look, you're making alliances that are not of my spirit. All you need is me. All you need to do is trust me. And I think we do it on a personal level. It's easy to make alliances to make us feel significant, like we're in the know. Right? And you want to be, right? So let me fill you in on a little bit, right? So it's so easy to do. And I am in the same boat. I am guilty of this. It is so easy to do. But I think we got to be on guard, right? Because it affects the person when it gets back to them. It affects the person it's spoken about. The second person that it hurts is the listener. That person that we're telling the gossip, sharing those choice morsels with, it actually hurts them. Proverbs 17:4 says this. It says, wrongdoers eagerly listen to gossip. Right? I mean, they just can't wait. Oh, let me in. Tell me what's going on. Oh, that's good. Right? Can I have some more? Right? It's like wrongdoers. I mean, they're just eager to kind of hear and listen to all these things. It says liars pay close attention to slander. Why? Because it's like, oh man, that's information. I can go and I can share that about them. I'm going to go and take and share these morsels with somebody else. Right? And so it's actually damaging. We're a wrongdoer when we're taking in gossip. And I realize that in those moments, it's really hard when somebody is sharing and we're hearing it. And I heard someone say this next bullet point here, is that what you permit, you promote. Isn't that so true? Yeah. It's like we're blessing it. Right. Oh, come on, sister. Tell me some more, right? Come on, brother. What else? It's not just women, it's men too, right? It's like, let's just get the rumor weed grow. Let's go fertilize. Ooh, let's get some more, right? And we just go and go and go, right? And so what you permit, you promote. And it's like you give the listener permission to share it. And we just keep promoting it and promoting it. And it's so easy to do until you find out that it's about you. And then we all feel the sting of it. Now, gossip is something that has gone on throughout history, the history of mankind. You find it in the Old Testament and you find it in the New Testament. And it was actually an issue that was hurting the church during the early church. And the Apostle Paul, he's writing this letter to his young apprentice, this young pastor, guy by the name of Timothy, and he's addressing an issue of dealing with widows. And there's just a list that these widows were being put on, because when you read beginning the book of Acts, you will see that some of the widows were being overlooked, right? Women that are widows, that are older, they're beyond, they're not working, that they needed to be supported. And so there was a list that they were putting people on who needs to be cared for because it was being missed. And so Peter and John, these guys were standing up and said, look, we're to stick to the preaching of the word, so let's get some people to help minister to make sure we got the needs of these widows and others being taken care of. They're going to get food, they're going to get whatever supplies they need. So these lists that they would keep, making sure that none of them were being overlooked. And so Paul addresses this because there's different ages of widows that goes on. So in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 13, it says this. And he's addressing widows. And he says, and if they are on the list, it's talking about the younger widows, they will learn to be lazy and will spend their time gossiping from house to house. This is obviously an issue that was going on. Meddling in other people's business and talking about things they shouldn't. Now, why is Paul addressing it? Because it's so easy to do. And it was an issue in the early church. And he's like, we got to address this. We've got to encourage these young widows to get a job and to stop being idle and stop going around and spreading stories, but to stay busy and start doing things and be productive with their lives. But it was an issue in the early church. And they're just going around from house to house, sharing, gossiping information, personal information about other people in the church, right? And it was becoming just destructive to the church. And so Paul had to address it, and he gave Timothy instructions on how to go about doing it, right? And it's so easy to get entangled in the muck of it all. And so it hurts the person that's being spoke about. It hurts the person that's hearing it, right? The listener, it gets them in the midst because you spread it to one person, then it goes to another person. The next thing you know, they're in the chain of gossip, right? Third thing is, which is obvious too, is it also hurts the person that's gossiping, right? It hurts us when we are the ones running our big fat mouth. Notice this next verse here, Proverbs 25, 9 and 10. It says this. It says, when arguing with your neighbor, don't betray another person's secret. I love arguing with my neighbors. Just kidding. Right? It says, when arguing with a neighbor. Now, let's just be honest. So, sometimes what it's referring to, sometimes in the heat of the moment, right? We get all worked up, right? And it's like, and then you're just like, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, well, if it wasn't for so-and-so, right? And all of a sudden, that personal information about somebody else just comes right out of our mouth, right? It's like it gives us leverage, right? And so it's like, when arguing with your neighbor, don't betray another person's secret. Verse 10, others may accuse you of gossip, and you will never regain your good reputation. Now, let's be honest. When you are listening to somebody that's gossiping, the listener never stops and says, man, I want to be just like you. Nobody ever thinks that, right? But it's so easy to get caught up in that moment. And when we start gossiping, we become known as a gossip, and it's damaging to our reputation. And when we look at these scriptures, the scriptures are written to believers, right? It's easy to say, well, no, those non-believers. I mean, of course, no, it's written to the church. In the Old Testament, it's to the assembly of God's people. It's so easy to do. And it's so easy to just to get on the phone and say things, or get in person and say things. It's just so easy to open our big fat mouth. And we all struggle with it in one way or another. I heard someone say, when you gossip, you've got constipation of the mind and diarrhea of the mouth. I should have put that on the screen. You guys could have memorized that one. Constipation of the mind and diarrhea of the mouth. You and I, Mike, we don't ever struggle with that. Thank God. So the next thing I want us to look at today is, so how is it that you deal with gossip? How do you deal with gossip? And I'm just going to be honest, it is a tough one, right? Because especially in the church, we care about people. And we want to share information to help encourage and protect people, right? And so sometimes we just got to be mindful and careful of how we're going about saying things. So the first thing, dealing with gossip, one of the first things we need to do is we got to work on guarding our ears. Guard your ears. Take those little choice morsels out of the bag when somebody starts to gossip and stick them in your ear. And then when they wonder why you're doing it, then you can say, because I don't want to hear it. Stick them in your ear, right? Just stop listening to what you are listening to. Now, here's some rules of thumb that I've just learned over the years. And I'm doing this message because I need this message, all right? And so these are things you can say to me when you hear me saying something. I'm out of line. And people have helped me in this through the years, just being honest. Brothers and sisters in Christ have called me out on it. So here's a question. You just need to ask a question. Ways you guard your ears is to ask a question. You say, why are you telling me this? Right? Why are you sharing this information with me? You know, why are you telling me this? Now, and don't say it with attitude. Why are you telling me this? Right? Don't say it with attitude. It's just in our humility, using our words in a way that's uplifting. We talk about this in the series. Ask the question, why are you telling me this? Now, I know it seems a little confrontational. And then there's a different way that you can actually phrase it. All right, here's another way you can phrase it. Have you had a chance to talk to them about this? Right? Have you had a chance to talk to them about this issue? Because I think one of the things we struggle with more than anything in our culture today is we don't know how, we've talked about it. It's the last year, the couple years of COVID just brought the worst out in us, right? And we just don't know how to deal with conflict. Right. We don't know how to talk through our differences because we spend so much time on social media and texting, it was emailing, that we don't know how to have one-on-one conversations with people. We don't know how to work through and have actually a conversation. Before church, a couple of us were talking about, when I was a kid growing up, I actually sat on my neighbor's front porch for hours as a kid. And somebody said, what do you think, contributed to that? We were talking about this morning where we went. And I said, the garage door opener. And he's like, what? The garage door opener? Really? I said, yeah. Because we didn't have a garage when I was a kid growing up. You didn't have garage door openers. You had to open it yourself. It took work. And so lots of times, you'd see your neighbor. And you'd stand there and talk with your neighbor. Or you go sit on the front porch with them. We understood community, and we were a more communal culture. But once they invented that garage door opener, it became the bat cave. Disappear. Neighbors never see me. Right? And the next thing you know, all this technology. Then we get telephones, we get smartphones, and now we don't even have to talk to people. We can text them. We don't know how to have conversation, right? We've got to learn how to have conversation. So we asked the question, have you had a chance to talk to them about this? Now, what a brilliant question. Where does that question come from? It actually comes from Jesus. Right? This is what Jesus said. We're going to look at a couple different passages in the Gospels where Jesus taught these things. He says this, Matthew 18, verse 15. He says, if another believer sins against you, let's just say if there's an offense, or even, let's just even fill in the blank here. There's some kind of relational issue that's going on. Or maybe something about that person. Another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. In other words, we've taken that issue and we've sat down with that person in private and talked with them and encouraged them in a loving way. Not, you know that you do this? No, not pointing the finger, not shredding, right? We talked about not grumbling, but having a loving conversation with that person and talking through the issue with them. Now, I know that it's not easy to do, and I know it's not something we've all been really good at, but this is the model, this is the target that Jesus gives us. And when we do that, when we ask those questions, if you had a chance to talk to them about that, guess what we're doing in that moment? We're helping them and ourselves become more like Jesus. Amen. And that's our goal, right? That's the goal of what God has for us in molding us and becoming more like himself. Right? Here's another time when Jesus addresses a similar thing when it comes to conflict. Matthew chapter 5, verse 23 and 24. He says, when you're coming to worship God, all right, in this particular case, they would bring sacrifices into the temple to worship. It's like when you're bringing your offering, right? Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and you remember there's this issue, this unresolved issue between a brother or sister is something against you. Verse 24 says, leave your gift. Right? Leave your gift. Put it in the offering bag. Okay, leave your gift. I'm just kidding. I've heard some pastors say that. It's a joke. All right. Leave your gift in front of the altar and then go and what? Be reconciled to that person first. First go, be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. And that's the key. That's what God is after. That's why Jesus died on the cross, was so we could be reconciled, made right with God. And he wants us to learn to work through the challenges and the issues and our differences, because some of us are just different than others. Thank God we're all different. And sometimes when we're different, it can drive us crazy, right? I mean, anybody that's married, you know your spouse is different. And they can drive you crazy. And then you start having kids. What was I thinking? And they can drive you crazy because they don't think the way you think. But you don't go on social media, post about how crazy they are, right? You shouldn't, right? But we're all different on person. We're all different. God made us that way. So we need to go and make things right. So let me give you another bullet point. What Jesus is basically telling us is this. Don't leave matters of the heart unsettled. Because that's what comes out of us. There's these unsettled things in our hearts, something in us, some brokenness in us, some insecurity in us that I just gotta feel like I'm important. So I'm gonna tell you this good story about somebody else. It makes me feel significant. There's something going on inside of us that makes us want to open our big fat mouth. And our significance should only come from Christ. And so Jesus says, don't let issues of the heart be unsettled. Go and make things right. So the first thing we got to do is to guard our ears. All right. Second, and then Proverbs 20, got another verse here. Proverbs 20, verse 19, it says, a gossip goes around telling secrets, so don't hang around with chatterers. All right. So over and over again, this is an issue. Next thing, first thing we do is guard our ears. Next one is to guard your mouth. Guard your mouth. Proverbs 21:23. It says, those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity. Right? I shared this verse from a different translation the first week. Basically, when we open our big fat mouth, we just get into trouble so quickly. And it's so easy to do. Guard your mouths and your tongues, and that'll keep us from calamity. Now, I'm going to tell you a story. Not long ago, I went into a coffee shop. I was going to go in and study a little bit, and I went in to get some coffee. When I walked in, there were these two ladies sitting at this table. They couldn't see me, and I just overheard them talking. And they're talking about our church. They went to our church, and they're talking about our church. And my ears are kind of perking up. It's like, and they start talking about some of the challenges, the problems we have in our church. And then they start talking about me. And then my ears really perked up. I was like, oh. So I got my coffee, and I walked over to that table, and I set it down. Hi, honey. So you guys are ready for the juicy information, right? I was just hanging out with my wife and daughter. But once you start hearing the story, we're hooked, right? And we just want to hear more, right? Let's hear some more, Jim. Tell us, right? So guard our ears, guard your mouth, right? So here's the last thing I want to kind of leave us with is this. When we speak about other people, speak so well of others. Is there one there? There we go. Speak so well of others that it spreads. Right. That's what spreads. So when somebody comes up and says, hey, did you hear about Mike? No. Did you hear what so-and-so said about you? It's like, man, they're talking about how you are so faithful. That they've never seen it, but you've inspired them to be a better server. Because you come in every Sunday and do the things you do to help get things ready for other people to come. Right? I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if the things you heard about you being spread around was good and encouraging? And that's what God is after for us. And so I want to close with some really good gossip here that was in the church. All right? This is taking place in the church. This was in 3 John. It's not a book that probably gets read a whole lot. This little book, chapter 3 John, chapter 1, verse 9 through 12. And John is writing to the church about this issue. And he said, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. There's always one of those people in the church, right? So verse 10, so when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. somebody in the church spreading malicious nonsense. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. This is going on in the early church, guys. Verse 11, dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Verse 12, check this out. There's this other guy, Demetrius. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone. And even by the truth itself, we also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. Now, which of those two do you want to be? Right? So let's choose to be like Christ and choose to watch our big fat mouths before it just makes a mess of everything. Amen.